According to the central dogma, translation is the final step, wherein the transcribed RNA from the gene that is present in the DNA is translated into a polypeptide. Now, interestingly, this entire central dogma uh, requires the involvement of RNA, especially in the process of translation. And this session will be basically giving an overview of the key requirements of these RNA in the prokaryotic translation. So, what are the learning outcomes of this session? All three RNAs have an important role to play in the molecular mechanism of translation, which is conserved across species, with differences just being in the accessory proteins. To translate the codes present in the mRNA, because the mRNA is transcribed from the gene, that is the DNA. And so there is a language in form of codes that has to be decoded. So it is the tRNA and the ribosomes together that decode the codes that are present in the RNA to form the polypeptide. The ribosomes have the catalytic ribosomal RNA. So you see the third RNA come into picture. That is the ribosomal RNA that are present in the ribosomes are catalytic. They are the ones that carry out the peptide bond synthesis. And hence, you will find that because the ribosomes are associated with mRNA, tRNA, and the rRNA, it is the ribosomes that are considered to be the protein manufacturing unit. The tRNAs, of course, are the molecules that read the codons in the mRNA, and based on this reading, they bring in the appropriate, correct amino acid, thereby acting as an adapter between the mRNA and the protein being formed. Now, let us look at the messenger RNA. So, when you talk about the messenger RNA, of course, the first thing that comes up is this, that the messenger RNA has been transcribed from a point where there is a promoter region. So, a gene that has a promoter region, from there the RNA polymerase has transcribed an mRNA from the 5' to 3' direction. So, let us consider that this is the messenger RNA. This messenger RNA will always invariably have within its structure something that is called as the open reading frame. So, and most likely the open reading frame begins with what is called as a start codon. In case of the prokaryotes, AUG is majorly the start codon, but you could also have GUG and UUG that can act as start codons in prokaryotes. While uh, the ORF ends always almost with what is called as a stop codon. So you have UAG, UGA, and UAA. All these three codons act as stop codons. So basically, what we understand is that beginning from the AUG to the UAG, so beginning from the start codon to the stop codon, the mRNA is going to be translated into a polypeptide. So this is the region from which you get a polypeptide. So this is the point from where the ribosome will start reading the mRNA to synthesize the protein, and hence this is what is called as the open reading frame. Now, the start codon, that is the AUG, apart from being the initiator codon, that means that brings in the first amino acid. But apart from that, it also basically decides the reading frame. Now, say, take into consideration, if the reading starts from AUG, then you know that the first initiator tRNA will come and bind to this and add methionine. But say it starts from U, then the reading frame will change. It will become UGN. Say it starts from G, then it will become GNN. So the positioning of this start codon onto the ribosome is critical to decide the reading frame per se. So deciding on the fact that AUG should be the start codon is a sequence that is present just 3 to 9 nucleotides before the start codon. in a region that is called as UTR. So an mRNA will at both its ends, that is 5' end and the 3' end, have something that is called as UTR regions. What does UTR stand for? It is untranslated regions. So these portions of the mRNA are never going to be translated into a polypeptide, because the portion that is going to be converted into polypeptide is from here to here, which is the open reading frame. But like mentioned, just about 3 to 9 nucleotides prior to the start codon, within the 5' UTR is present something that is called as the ribosome binding sequence. In prokaryotes, it is more commonly called as the Shine-Dalgarno sequence, and the Shine-Dalgarno sequence is more or less conserved, and it has a sequence NGGAGG. Now, the presence of this Shine-Dalgarno sequence is important because this sequence helps the mRNA to position itself on the small subunit of the RNA. So ribosomes are recruited to this sequence. We all know that ribosomes are the manufacturing units. So the mRNA has to attach itself to the ribosomes. And so the lodging of the mRNA onto the ribosomes is thanks to the Shine-Dalgarno sequence. And interestingly, this Shine-Dalgarno sequence, which is of course a nucleotide sequence, is able to find a complementarity to the ribosomal RNA that is present in the ribosome. So effectively, you will find that the ribosome comes and binds to the 5' UTR region. Okay, now it's not positioned this way, but this is just to show that the initial binding of the ribosome is at the 5' UTR region itself. So what is observed is, say for example, this is the mRNA with the GGAGG, that means the Shine-Dalgarno sequence. This sequence will complementarily bind to 16S ribosomal RNA that is present in the ribosome. So you can see that the RNA-RNA interaction allows the mRNA to bind to the ribosome. So therefore, this portion of the mRNA is of significance. Now, the 3' UTR region can be bound to by several proteins, and these proteins seem to basically either stabilize the mRNA so that translation happens with greater efficiency, and it can also regulate expression. That is, whether this mRNA should go in for translation or not can be decided by proteins that are associated at the UTR region. Another important fact that one has to keep in mind, especially when one looks at the prokaryotic system, is that if an mRNA contains only one open reading frame, then such mRNA are considered to be monocistronic. But in prokaryotes, what one finds is that several transcripts or several mRNA that are formed have more than one ORF. So when you have one ORF, you get one polypeptide. But when suppose you have an mRNA which has more than one ORF, so you can see start, stop. This is one ORF, start, stop, one ORF, start, stop, one ORF. So here we are looking at a transcript, that is RNA, which has three open reading frames. And just before every start codon, you would have the ribosome binding sequence, or what is called as a Shine-Dalgarno sequence. So effectively understand that if a ribosome binds over here, it will initiate translation from this point, stop at this point. From here, it will go to the next Shine-Dalgarno sequence, start the synthesis from here, stop at this, and then go to this, start from here and stop. So you would effectively get maybe with the same ribosome or maybe with different ribosomes as well, because since you have an RBS present over here, you can have a ribosome recruited here, you can have a ribosome recruited here as well. So effectively, from this one mRNA, you're going to get three polypeptides. And such mRNA which have more than one ORFs are called as the polycistronic mRNA. Now, in certain mRNA, like in this mRNA, it is so well defined as you have a clear start codon and a clear stop codon with an RBS sequence just before the start. You may not have all mRNA having more than one ORF having this distinctive structure. Sometimes what is observed is that the start codon and the stop codon. So the stop codon of the previous UGA. So for example, this is the stop codon UGA. This stop codon is for this ORF. But you can see that this is overlapping with the start codon of the next ORFs. You see AUG is the start codon for the next. So you may have structures like that where you have this mechanism of initiating translation from an overlapping start stop codon happening through regulations. But this is something that is possible, and this is what is called as translational coupling. Now we go to transfer RNA. Now the transfer RNA per se, most transfer RNA are between 75 to 95 nucleotides long, and although transcribed as an extended single-stranded RNA, this tRNA is known to have a lot of sequences within itself that are complementary to each other. And because these sequences present within itself are complementary to each other, the tRNA tends to form a secondary structure. So, most tRNA have a few common features because of the way it folds to form the secondary structure. So, almost all tRNA fold to form a structure like this. And there are certain features of this structure which are common with respect to all tRNA. So one of the most important feature that is present in all tRNA is the presence of a CCA. So these are conserved at the 3' end of the tRNA. And it is to this A that the amino acid binds. So we all know that the tRNA can bind to a cognate amino acid. So what do we understand by cognate amino acid is we will see in a while. But what is important is that this becomes the acceptor arm for binding to the amino acid. Amino acid will not bind to any other portion of the tRNA except this acceptor arm. And so this portion of the tRNA, which is a secondary structure, so this is a stem structure. So you see you have several stem loop structures present. So this stem structure, which is a secondary structure, is what is called as the acceptor stem. Interestingly, within this acceptor stem are present many non-Watson and Crick base pairing. So Watson and Crick base pairing is the typical GC and the AT base pairing. But in many instances, you can see that you can have non-Watson and Crick base pairing as well, as mentioned by Wobble's hypothesis that was proposed by Crick himself. So this acceptor stem can have a lot of non-Watson and Crick base pairing seen. The next stem loop structure is called as the D loop. Now, why is it called as the D loop? The answer to this is that within this loop are present several uridines. Okay, now before I go into that, let me make a point over here is that many or almost all tRNAs have a lot of rare nucleotides present. And these rare nucleotides are formed only after transcriptions. That means post transcription, enzymatically, many of the normal nucleotides are converted into not normal, so rare nucleotides or unusual nucleotides or unusual bases. So a lot of unusual bases are found in the tRNA. And this D loop also has unusual bases wherein the uridines, many of the uridines, not all, many of the uridines present in this loop. Okay, so uridine is this structure where this is the uracil. So uracil, as you can see, is a pyrimidine ring. This is one. So the numbering is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The one N is bound to the one carbon, 1' carbon of the ribose. So it is always basically a N-glycosidic linkage, but 1' N-glycosidic linkage. So this is the UMP that is generally present in normal RNA. But when you have this, okay, modified such that this double bond is replaced by two more hydrogens, then this forms what is called as dihydrouridine. And that's where the name D comes from, because uridine in this loop has been observed to be enzymatically modified into dihydrouridine. Now we go to the next stem loop structure. This stem loop structure is very important for translation because this is what is called as the anticodon loop. Now this anticodon loop at its end over here has three nucleotides that acts as an anticodon. Now, what do we mean by anticodon? These are the nucleotides that are complementary to the codons that are present in mRNA. So, when you have an mRNA present over here, a codon will complementarily bind to the anticodon. So, effectively, what we are understanding is that this tRNA is able to read a codon on the mRNA thanks to the presence of an anticodon in its anticodon loop. So one of its major role of being the adapter is because it has the anticodon present in the anticodon arm that can directly bind to the codon that is present in the mRNA. So we can see that there is an RNA-RNA interaction, an interaction between the tRNA and the mRNA because of complementary binding. So you have hybridization happening over here between the anticodon and the codon in the mRNA. So therefore, this is what is called as the anticodon loop. Now we come to the next part of the typical structure of the tRNA, and this loop is what is called as the variable loop. The reason why it is called as a variable loop is because this can vary from anywhere between 3 to 21 nucleotides. So the length of this loop varies. No distinctive function has been attributed to this variable loop except for the fact that this variable loop does contribute to further folding of the tRNA. So it does have a structural implication. And the ranging between 75 and 95 nucleotides has been observed to be because of the length of the variable loop per se. Now we come to the last stem loop structure of the tRNA, and this is called as the T-Cy-C loop. So this typical name of the loop is because of the presence of what is called as pseudouridine. So the psi over here stands for what is called as pseudouridine. So in this loop as well, uridine R is, and only a specific uridine which is present between a T and a C is modified into pseudouridine. Now let us understand what is pseudouridine. So we see that a uracil is always linked to ribose through its one nitrogen. So the nitrogen at the first position is linking with the 1' carbon of the ribosome. So you basically have an N-glycosidic linkage which is 1'. But in pseudouridine, what is observed is that it is no longer an N-glycosidic linkage, but the ribose binds to the fifth carbon. So you in turn have just a simple glycosidic linkage, that too not at the first position, it is at the fifth position. So therefore, this is what is called as a pseudouridine. You see, it is still a UMP, but it is not the natural UMP, and therefore this is what is called as the pseudouridine. So therefore, such a structure of tRNA, which is seen in all the tRNA, is called as the clover leaf structure. And the clover leaf structure is the best example of secondary structure in nucleic acids. Whenever one refers to nucleic acid structure, secondary structure, one always refers to the clover leaf structure. It's called as clover leaf because it looks like a clover leaf. Now, apart from these, that is the dihydrouridine and the pseudouridine, the tRNA also has hypoxanthine in its structure, which is again unnatural. Thymine. So you know that DNA contains thymine, and in place of thymine in RNA is present uridine. But some of the methyl cytosins are converted into, some of the uridines are converted into methyl uridine to form the thymine. So therefore you have this modification also happening, and T is definitely an abnormal base in the tRNA. One also has what is called as methyl guanine present in its structure. Now, so these unnatural or unusual or rare nucleotides being present in tRNA, what is its role, or what significance does it have? So what has been understood is this, that these unusual nucleotides are not really needed for the functioning of the tRNA, for the basic functioning of the tRNA. So the function of the tRNA will be the same even if you remove these unusual nucleotides. But studies have shown that the presence of these unusual nucleotides are adding to the efficiency with which the tRNA functions. So if you remove the, through mutation, if you remove the unusual nucleotides, then the potential with which the tRNA functions is going to become less. Like for example, the presence of hypoxanthine in a nucleotide, and that nucleotide is generally the inosine monophosphate. Inosine is responsible for wobbling at the anticodon region. So whenever you have an anticodon with an inosine present, the tRNA is able to bind to more than one codon. Okay, so therefore that wobbles hypothesis is thanks to an unusual base in the tRNA. Now let us look at that, the fact that the cloverleaf structure, that is the secondary structure, can get converted into a tertiary structure. So you can have further folding of the tRNA happening. As you can see, this is the cloverleaf structure, and you see a minor change making it an inverted L. So you can see this becomes an inverted L. This is important. Why is it important? Because it accentuates the two main domains that are required in translation. What are the two main domains? The acceptor arm that in fact will bind to the amino acid, and you have the anticodon arm. So the anticodon present in the anticodon arm will bind to the mRNA, while this tRNA is going to carry the cognate amino acid to form what is called as amino acid tRNA amino acid, which means that if you have a codon over here in the mRNA that is coding for leucine, then the anticodon that is present in the tRNA will be able to bind to the leucine codon. So because this anticodon has or is for leucine, you have to have this tRNA being bound to leucine. So that is what is called as cognate amino acid. If the tRNA has an anticodon for proline, it has to have proline bound to it. If the tRNA has an anticodon for isoleucine, then the amino acid to be bound over here should be isoleucine. And when the tRNA is bound to an amino acid, the tRNA is considered to be charged. And this charging of the tRNA with the amino acid is carried out by an enzyme, amino acyl tRNA synthetase, which will be taken up in a later session. But this is the understanding that every tRNA is linked to its cognate amino acid. And in a way, therefore, the tRNA is responsible for bringing in the correct amino acid while the polypeptide is being synthesized. So this therefore is important. What is important in translation is the anticodon arm. This is accentuated. And what is important is the amino acid arm. It is accentuated. And this accentuation of the two domains is thanks to the fact that the T C loop and the D loop can interact with each other to form this structure. So what you will find is that the acceptor arm and the anticodon arm at a distance of 70 angstroms. This is important. Why? Because the amino acid will be present in the large subunit of the ribosome, while the anticodon arm will be in the small subunit of the, and so this distance matters. Now, this becomes an extended helix. This also, so you will have two extended helices, and the folding of this into this is thanks to van der Waals interactions, ionic interactions, hydrophobic interactions, hydrogen bonding, especially between non-Watson and Crick base pairing, and this folding is made favorable due to the presence of divalent ions. Now you can imagine this is a sugar phosphate backbone, this is a sugar phosphate backbone. So this is negatively charged, this is negatively charged, and any two components which are negatively charged will be repelled. But if there is a divalent cation present between this strand and this strand, then this gets stabilized. So all divalent ions are stabilizing this tertiary structure formation. So it has been also studied that when levels of divalent ions are decreased, the folding of the RNA is affected. Now we go to ribosomes and the ribosomal RNA. So in prokaryotes, the ribosomes are the 70S type. Now we of course can correlate the 70S with the fact that when these ribosome particles are centrifuged, they sediment, and based on the sedimentation coefficient, you term this entire structure to be 70S. When both the subunits of the ribosome are together, then they have a sedimentation coefficient depending on their shape, size, and mass. So they are 70S. But we all know therefore that 70S has two subunits. One is the large subunit, which is the 50S, and the other one is the small subunit, which is 30S. So these two can assemble to form the 70S, and the 70S can disassemble to form the 30S and 50S. So distinctively there is something which is called as the ribosome cycle, where the two subunits assemble and the two subunits disassemble. So this ribosome cycle is important for translation. And the assembly of 50S to 30S again needs magnesium ions specifically. Of course, other divalent ions can also help, but what has been studied is when magnesium ions are decreased in concentration, in equivalent concentration, then the assembly of the 50S with the 30S is affected. Now, the 30S in turn contains 21 proteins. They are all small proteins, and since they belong to the small subunit, they are labeled as S1, S2, S3. But what is significantly important in this 30S subunit is the presence of 16S rRNA. Now, when you look at the volume of these two, you will find that the volume of one single ribosomal RNA is almost equivalent to 21 proteins. And what has also been observed is in vitro, if you want to carry out translation without these proteins, it is possible. That means 16S rRNA is needed, mRNA is needed, tRNA is needed, but you may not need these 21 proteins. However, for efficient performance of translation, these 21 proteins are able to give what is called as a structural stability to the ribosome, and hence the efficacy with which 16S rRNA works is better. Now, what is also observed is that the 50S is subdivided again into 31 proteins. Since they belong to the large subunit, they are termed as L1, L2, L3, etc. And they have two ribosomal RNA, that is 23S rRNA and 5S rRNA. And it's the 23S rRNA which acts as a ribozyme. That means this has a catalytic role, and it is responsible for synthesis of it is responsible for forming peptide bonds between amino acids. So basically what we understand is that in the large subunit, you have a 23S rRNA that acts as ribozyme. So here what is important to note is that the ribosomal RNA not just have a structural implication, but they also are acting as, or they have what is called as a catalytic implication. And what has been observed is that translation is at the rate of 20 to 20 amino acids per second, much lesser than the rate at which DNA polymerase replicates DNA, but it does correlate with the transcription rate. So when you look at 20 amino acids, 20 amino acids are coded by codons that are triplets. So you need to have 20 into 3. So 20 into 3 will be um, approximately 60 nucleotides. So what is observed is that the transcription is anywhere between 50 to 100 nucleotides per second, and sometimes even more. It can go up to 500 nucleotides per second as well. So it does keep a certain level of correlation with the transcription rate per se. And one other thing that is important, especially in prokaryotes, is that because the prokaryotes do not have a nuclear membrane, transcription and translation go hand in hand. So suppose RNA polymerase has transcribed the RNA and you have about 50 20 to 50 nucleotides of RNA being formed, then uh, when more of the RNA is formed, so a ribosome can bind to that RNA instantly and start translation as well. So as the RNA polymerase continues to synthesize RNA, the RNA that is being synthesized is already used by the ribosome to synthesize the proteins. So therefore it is called that translation and transcription go hand in hand in prokaryotes. Now, let us look at the 30S with the ribosomal RNA and the characteristic features of the 30S subunit that helps the ribosome to be the manufacturing unit for the polypeptides. So, the 30S, okay, has a few important structural features that help it to function as the manufacturing unit for polypeptides. So, it is considered to be the decoding center. Now, when you look at what is decoding center, obviously the understanding is that the central dogma says that DNA is transcribed into RNA. So the code or the information that is present in the DNA is now transcribed into RNA. So now it is the RNA that carries the information. And this information is in a certain language, the language of triplets. So you have triplet codons present in the RNA within its ORF that needs to be translated. And so the last process of the central dogma is where this ORF is translated into proteins. So therefore, transcription and translation will ultimately give you the proteins. Okay, so decoding these codes in the mRNA to form the link to form the amino acids and linking the amino acids to form the polypeptides, you need the tRNA which acts as the adapter between the two. So effectively what we are trying to look at is that in the process of translation you need mRNA, you need tRNA, and you need the ribosomal RNA which is present in the ribosomes. Now, this small subunit of the ribosome, which is the 30S, has an entry and exit channel for the mRNA. So at this point, this is the entry point of the mRNA. So when the mRNA enters the ribosome, it always enters through this and it will exit through this. So when it enters from the entry point, the mRNA can never be in the secondary structure form. If there is a secondary structure, it gets resolved at this point and what enters is only the single stranded RNA. Okay. Now, this entry of the mRNA into the ribosome, that is the 30S, is crucial. And why crucial? Because it has to position itself in a certain way. But you can understand, therefore, that it is a 30S that is being recruited to the mRNA, or you can say that the mRNA lodges itself in the 30S. Now, this 30S has three pockets, okay, half pockets, this, and this. So there are three distinct pockets present. These pockets are called as the A site for amino acid site, P site, peptidal site, and E site, that is exit site. Now, these pockets basically are large enough to accommodate one arm of the tRNA. So what you will observe is that a tRNA can come and bind to the peptidal site and another tRNA can come and bind to the amino acyl site when translation is to begin. But the reason why it is called as the peptidal site is because once translation begins, the tRNA that is present in the peptidal site will always carry the growing polypeptide. And this A site is empty for a new amino acyl tRNA to come in. That is the reason why this is called as the amino acyl site. And once you have this amino acid forming a peptide bond with this amino acid from this tRNA goes to this tRNA. So you will always find that the peptide that is present in the peptidal tRNA is always transferred to the amino acyl tRNA. So therefore what can happen is that, okay, before going into that, let us consider that once you have the tRNA coming and binding to these pockets, then you have the mRNA entering. Okay, now there are many hypotheses which suggest that an mRNA can come and bind first and then the tRNA can come and bind, or it can be the other way around, that the tRNA is bound and then the mRNA can come and bind. Okay, but What is important over here is that when the mRNA enters, the mRNA is positioned in such a way that the ORF, the start codon, is positioned at the P site. So you will have A, U, G. And at this point, there is a kink. So the mRNA will bend, and the next codon, that is C, say for example U, 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 that is present at the A site. So you have one codon accommodating the P site, and the next codon, immediate adjacent next codon, is accommodating the A site. This is important, which means what we are trying to look at is that at the P site, you should always have the start codon coming and positioning itself. So the question next is, what decides that? We will come to that. Oh no, we already have seen that, and that is that you have the 16S rRNA. The 16S rRNA has complementarity to the Shine-Delgarno sequence. So if this is the start codon, about 3 to 9 base pairs before that, you have the Shine-Delgarno sequence, which is GGAGG, that binds to the 16S rRNA. And this interaction is helping position the AUG at the P site and the adjacent codon at the A site. So when this amino acid is transferred, this tRNA becomes empty, not charged. So that tRNA moves to this pocket, and from this pocket it will exit. That's the reason why this is called as the exit pocket of the ribosomal RNA. So this is what we understand of the 16S rRNA having the complementary sequence to bind to the mRNA, that is the Shine-Delgarno sequence of the mRNA, and you can see that the AUG is just a few bases or a few nucleotides away. So when you have the 16S rRNA bound to the Shine-Delgarno sequence, AUG will automatically be positioned at the P site. That is the importance of the entry channel, the presence of the 16S rRNA in the 30S subunit, and this entire thing becomes what is called as the decoding center. Why is it called the decoding center? Because the tRNA with its anticodon is binding to the codon in the mRNA at this position. Now let us look at ribosome and the 23S RNA, which means we are looking at the 50S, large subunit. So we already have the small subunit attached to the mRNA and the tRNA. Okay. Then the large subunit comes in, and when the large subunit comes in and binds, interestingly, the large subunit also has the half pockets, and these half pockets position themselves exactly on the pockets that are present in the small subunit. So therefore, now the A site is complete, now the P site is complete, and now the E site is complete. And you can see that the tRNA is accommodating the entire pocket. So that is why it stabilizes itself within this pocket, and therefore efficiently can carry out or help in the carrying out the translation. Now, just above the P site over here is present what is called as the peptidyl transferase center. So it is at this position that you have, or this peptidyl transfer center is filled up by the 23S rRNA. You must understand 23 rRNA is long, large. So you have it present all over, but this entire peptidyl transfer center is definitely filled up with the 23S rRNA, and that region of the 23S rRNA which can carry out the catalytic action. So we know that 23S rRNA acts as a ribozyme. Now, just above the A site is present another region which is called as the factor binding center, and this has a regulatory role. When we look at the mechanism of translation, we will understand what role this factor binding center has. Uh, just above the peptidyl transferase center is another channel, which is the exit channel for the newly synthesized polypeptide. So since peptide bond is formed over here, you will have the growing polypeptide coming out like this. So it is through this channel that the growing polypeptide comes out. And you can see that this amino acid is actually linked to this growing polypeptide. Now, what is interesting to note is how the peptide bond is formed at the peptidyl transfer center. So consider this is the tRNA. Okay, this is the tRNA. that is carrying the growing polypeptide. So consider this is the growing polypeptide. Now, whenever a tRNA is bound to an amino acid, it is always bound through its carboxyl group. So the 3' CCA of the tRNA, which is conserved, is always bound to the carboxyl group of the amino acid in an acyl bond. Okay, and this acyl bond is a high energy bond. Now, when you have this tRNA present with the growing polypeptide and you have another tRNA combined over here, this is the new tRNA with another amino acid. So this amino acid that is bound to the amino acyl tRNA is again bound in such a way that its carboxyl group, that is the amino acid's carboxyl group, is bound to the tRNA. And so what is free is its NH2 group. We all know that amino acids have a free NH2 group and it has a free carboxyl group. In this case, the carboxyl group is no longer free because it is attached to the 3' CCA of the tRNA. So what is free is the NH2. Here it has a lone pair of electron. That lone pair of electron is able to initiate the breaking of this bond. Okay. Now, as this bond breaks, this forms a bond with the NH. So, what is ultimately formed is the C double bond O, and this link is attached to NH over here. So, you get what is called as a CONH bond, that is a peptide bond. So, when that happens, this tRNA is left with the OH group and it is now free. It is no longer charged. And the second important thing to be noted is that the entire growing polypeptide has been transferred to the amino acyl tRNA, which is present over here. Okay, so this is how the peptide bond is formed. And who forms it? It is the 23S rRNA that is carrying out this catalytic reaction. Now let us understand what is the ribosome cycle. So for example, suppose you have the 30S to which the mRNA comes and binds, and then you have the tRNA coming and binding, and then you have the large subunit coming and binding. Now this as a complete complex, okay, is going to translocate on the mRNA, okay, and it will synthesize the polypeptide over here. Now, this movement or translocation, so either you will have the mRNA translocating, the ribosome translocates, okay, so as it goes from the start codon and reaches the stop codon here, right? So, the ribosome has moved from the start codon to the stop codon. At the stop codon, translation should stop. So, when it stops, you would have the large subunit and the small subunit disassembling, okay? So, this is what is going to happen. This can again assemble at the start codon, and that is the reason why it is called as a ribosome cycle. That is, when it has to initiate translation, it will assemble, and when it stops or terminates translation, it is going to disassemble. So in fact, termination is related to disassembly of the two subunits. If you disassemble it, termination of translation will happen. If you assemble it, initiation of translation is going to happen. So this is what is called as ribosome cycle. Now let us make the conclusions. The mRNA within its structure has an ORF, which is translated by the ribosome, which in turn binds to the Shine-Delgarno sequence of the mRNA due to the presence of complementary sequences in its 16S rRNA. The tRNA in its tertiary structure has two distinct domains: the anticodon arm that can read the codon in the mRNA, that is present in the 30S, while the acceptor arm with the cognate amino acid is positioned close to the peptidyl transferase center in the 50S. Thus, the tRNA acts as the adapter between the mRNA and the growing polypeptide. The ribosomal RNA are both the structural and the catalytic components of the ribosomes, enabling ribosomes to synthesize proteins using mRNA as the template. The 23S rRNA, which fills up the peptidyl transferase center in the 50S, that is a large subunit, is able to catalyze the formation of a peptide bond. Thus, all the three RNAs, that is mRNA, tRNA, and ribosomal RNA, associate themselves with the ribosomes to manufacture the new polypeptides, with the protein components of the ribosome giving effective structural support. Thank you.